This basement was built by a novice DIYer, and each week you get to learn more about how he did it.
So these are my top plate, bottom plate. These are not load bearing, so I don't need to double up the top plate. I'm doing 16 on center. You got to end each one with a stud. I got to mark that down, and you have them next to each other because it's easier to do both at the same time. That way they line up.
It certainly sounds like I know what I'm talking about. After all, I watched hours of YouTube videos about framing walls, but I still managed to screw up 10 things while doing my first wall. And the fact is, there's a good chance you might make them too. So keep an eye out for tips and links, and the 10 mistakes that you'll want to avoid, even though I couldn't. And just so you don't make an additional mistake, notice that I'm building my wall on a subfloor. If you don't have a subfloor, make sure you're using pressure-treated wood as your base plate. Or if you're planning to build a subfloor, you could also watch the 3 videos I created when building my own subfloor, starting with episode 2. There are probably more videos about studding a wall than any other construction topic. A link to the primary video I followed is in the video description. If you're really uncertain about doing your own studding, I included a link to a video that's even more introductory. For what it's worth, I know you can do it, just like I did, no matter how many mistakes I started with.
So here, this is going to join a wall. I think I'm going to just do one stud normal, and then I'm going to do another stud this way, so it gives a surface to nail into. First, I'm just going to mark my 1.5. You watch any video, they put an X to signify the stud. So I'll do it because it makes me feel special. So I got to think about this. Because I want this to be on the outside, this one's going to be on top. See, that's a small screw up. Quite livable.
This is a problem that you really only run into when you're doing corner backing. The corner backing stud runs parallel to the base plate and needs to be on the drywall side of the wall. So if you're marking it on the left side of the bottom plate, you need to mark it on the right side of the top plate. Basically, the top and bottom plates are mirrors to each other, not identical.
14 foot isn't divisible by 16. I'm going to put a stud, and there's only like 8 inches before the next stud. I thought these were 12. On these boards, I marked where the studs are going on the flat side, which is where they're actually going to attach, but it's hard to see that from the end, which is where you're going to be nailing. So I got to kind of transpose the placement onto the sides.
Most people mark the tops of the stud, but depending upon which expert video you follow, some mark the flat side. I actually found marking both sides to be the best for a beginner.
So let's do some simple math. 93.5. This is 3 inches between the two. So we're talking 90.5 inches. Get to use my handy chop saw. So if this is my last video, it's because something went horribly wrong with the chop saw. So how specific do you have to be? The original is the bottom one. The second one is the one that I measured a 90 and 1/2 inch. And then the third is one where I did the line and then trimmed it based off the previous. And you can see it's basically a blade short.
It will be tempting to use your previous cut piece as a measuring stick to mark down your next cut. If you're really a novice like me, don't do it. You're only asking for trouble.
So one thing I'll point out, this was a really good tip. I can't remember the guy's name, but I'll link it right there. The fact that all wood has a crown, that there's a little bend to the studs just because of the tree. You want them all to be on the same side, and preferably you want to be the side that goes up against the wall. And the reason is because when you put drywall on, then the drywall isn't being pushed out by the crown of the wood. And now I get to break out the nail gun. Okay, so there is a depth gauge. Counterclockwise on this is this way. So we're going to go there. And we're going to put this back on. That's basically what I got to do this whole time. So that wasn't too bad. Going to tap in the nails over there.
The wall is done, but now I have another problem. It's too big to get into place. There's enough space behind the white radon pipe to slide in the wall, but the part of the pipe that's on the ceiling makes it impossible to slide the wall into position. I really needed to think this out in advance and make a smaller wall. Or I could have used a less common framing technique called framing in place. Here's a link to a video if you want to try that. Fortunately for me, I didn't have to tear apart my wall. I had another area that needed a wall just about the same size.
So anyway, it's a nice looking wall. What I got to do, I'm going to just measure that space. Put in whatever they're called. I'm sure there's a formal name.
Those pieces of wood are called blocking, and I won't remember that name through this entire video. You only need to use blocking when the joists you're trying to attach to are running parallel to the wall.
Get those in place, and then the wall can be raised. I went through and measured in a bunch of places, each one a different length, because the gap is different for each spot along this, between these two joists. So that's a pleasure. Totally missed it. Somehow went up, so my angle is totally off. Maybe the way to do this is just to use screws. Let's find out. Okay, so I cheated a little bit. I did all four.
So what I'm holding up in this very blurry picture is a piece of blocking with 4 screws towed in on the edges. This is similar to the approach shown in the blocking video I linked to. The basement finishing guy on YouTube used a nail gun to put in his blocking, so I gave it a try. But for a beginner, I definitely recommend using screws instead.
I could hang on it. I'm not going to, but I could. So no nail gun at all. Now I have those things in. Yay me. This is the only thing that's a remainder. That's a problem that I need to check into. So here's the deal.
My apologies for the following monologue. I had to vent a bit.
When we built the house 15 years ago, they put in on the entire front of the house, they put it on a separate switch. You flick the switch and all the outlets have power. And they did on both floors. So you can put candles in the windows, and we do. The problem is that is a junction box. And then there's another junction box there. And those junction boxes connect the frickin' Christmas lights. And I did double check. My regulation, and this is code, and you probably have it too, junction boxes. Every junction box needs to be accessible. Accessible means, hey, you could undo a screw or move a panel, that's made to be moved, but that's about it. And this right now where I'm standing is the frickin' music room. The whole goal of this room is to make it soundproof. And what this is making me do is figure out how to make it soundproof and still be able to access these things. This room's going to be a fucking pain in the ass. And it's kind of stopped me in my tracks. But I get to have a beer because I'm not using power tools. So what I did, which is probably what you should do if you run into a similar problem, is I reached out to my codes office and I proposed, hey, what if I put one wall here and maybe shift the junction boxes so that they are all in the gap between, maybe widen the gap a little bit. So we'll see what they come up with.
So as I was waiting for their response, I moved on to a smaller wall.
So same thing as before, but this time we'll do it correctly. Okay, stud, 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 stud. Look at this. This is insane how curved this is. This is insane. How am I supposed to straighten this shit out? I have to put one nail in low. But I gotta straighten this puppy out. And do it now. It was a Renovision had this cool hammer that had a hook that can grab boards and kind of turn them as you're doing stuff. I don't have one of those cool hammers. It gives me the leverage I need. Okay, so that's what you gotta do. Oh, you know what I didn't do? I installed these studs, but I never cut them. Now I've given myself a bit of extra work. Okay. It fucking sucks.
The lesson is simple. Don't rush through any step. I decided there were two ways I could fix it. I could take off one base plate, mark the correct lengths of the studs, and use a circular saw on them, or take the whole thing apart, measure the correct length of the studs, and use my miter saw. I seriously considered using the circular saw, but ended up doing option B.
My memory on my camera ran out, so what you missed was we ended up finishing these two walls as well and getting them in. They haven't been screwed or nailed in, but they're in place and they look like they're going to fit. You know, obviously got to shift them around to make sure that they're lined up, but they look pretty good.
You are now looking at my first wall. It was a bitch to get here, but very satisfying. Hopefully this video will save you from some of the same headaches. Be sure to check out my other videos to see what kind of problems a novice DIYer might run into.